reduce competition on AI. What I would advocate is first open source, very important. Then I would say too many regulations is not a good thing, because the large firms, the large incumbents, they know how to cope with regulations. The new entrants, they don't. The other thing is that we have in Europe the Digital Market Act that asks incumbent firms to share data. It should be extended to the cloud and the whole value chain of AI. And then, you should adapt competition policy. When you decide whether or not to allow a new merger and acquisition, usually competition authorities, they focus on market share and market definition, and not so much on the extent to which the merger will inhibit subsequent innovation. So they should have a much more dynamic approach to competition policy. So in the same way that we did not adapt competition policy to the IT revolution, it becomes even more urgent to reform our competition policy to fully take advantage of the growth potential of AI. Okay. So I am optimistic on the technology side, but I am not very optimistic on the institutional side. I don't know if we shall be able to adapt our competition policy to make sure that it's not all monopolized by a few firms that will discourage everybody. And that's where the downside, that's where I'm not so optimistic, you see. Europe could say I overregulate AI, but then AI will go to countries where it's not regulated at all. And at the end of the day, you lose to those countries, and the winners are those who don't regulate at all. So I rather regulate a little bit, remain attractive, so that overall AI will be more regulated. Otherwise, it will just develop in countries that are like you have pollution heavens.
Thanks for everybody for coming again to another webinar organized by Princeton for everybody worldwide. Today we have Philippe Aghion with us from INSEAD, Collège de France and LSE. Good to see you, Philippe.
Hi, Markus.
It's great to have you. You will talk about should we fear artificial intelligence? So
yes.
Shiva will calm down the spine for us. So let's see whether we should fear it or not. Let me give you some opening remarks and then Philippe will talk over.
Yes.
So of course, AI is a big technological revolution. It is transformative, it's general, so it covers many, many sectors of the economy and the society, and it will be disruptive or is disruptive. And some of the challenges of artificial intelligence are the unexplainability. So you don't know the source, there's no causal relationship we understand. It's mystic in a sense. The second thing is we will have AI agents which will execute things on our behalf, and we have to have an alignment problem to sort out. And then we have the singularity problem as well, that at some point AI will grow on its own and will lead to explosive growth and explosive relationships. Now, one can imagine three future scenarios. One is the dark one, which we fear, the existential risk. So Jeffrey Hinton and others are afraid of the existential risk. The other scenario is essentially that AI will amplify the good and the bad, and it really needs some directed push. So we have to select the good elements and prevent the bad elements. And the third, the positive, most positive one, is a future of abundance. So ideas will beat physical scarcity, and essentially we don't have to work anymore and everything will be perfect. But then the question is this really perfect? Does comfort without vocation make for us a happy life or not? And we can actually go back to Keynes' famous article, Prospects of Our Grandchildren. And he argued that, if the economic problem is solved, there's no scarcity anymore, mankind will be deprived of its traditional purpose, the purpose of life. And essentially, we might actually he argues, have a nervous breakdown. So even though it's abundance, it's very good from a materialistic perspective, it might be actually very problematic from a societal perspective, also for individuals' perspective, because we have to find a new purpose in life. Now, of course, it's not only what scenario we will end up with at the end. We also have to organize the transition from the current point And even if we have a better point ending up in the long run, we have to find out the transition, that there might be a slow transition over that. And this will be also challenging, even if the final outcome is very positive. And the way to think about it is you can think of two systems. There's one system which is the innovation system itself, which leads to this, frontier of innovation. But the implementation, the fusion of technology, and I think Philippe will talk more about that, might lead to a J-curve effect where first it goes down and then it goes back up. But the J-curve effect can actually be so pronounced that especially when we have a fast transition, that we might hit a tipping point. And rather than having a J-curve effect where we go back up, the whole system is not resilient. We hit the tipping point, and then, the situation gets much, much worse subsequently. Now, the question is, is the AI disruption really special compared to earlier technological disruptions we experienced as mankind? And I just would like to use here the production function. So we have a production function with capital and labor and some TFP, so total factor productivity. And if you think about the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, electricity, it was mostly focused on the capital and the labor productivity aspects. And of course, capital and human capital is depleting and must be rebuilt. There's a depreciation going on, and even human capital is depleting, and then the next generation has to be trained and so forth. So one big disruption was the Industrial Revolution. Of course, the transition was difficult, but ultimately we ended up with much more welfare. Another big disruption was the printing press, a la Gutenberg. That was more about the diffusion of knowledge of the productivity. And that essentially the transition led to the Reformation and the 30-Year War from 1618 to 1648. So there was huge disruption. So just the transition was a big challenge. Now, in what sense is AI different? It's also about diffusion of knowledge. Knowledge is transmitted across machines much more easily. So humans, the next generation has to learn and has got to go to school. It's very high effort involved. Machines can just pick up the knowledge from the previous machine and it's just copied over. But AI touches on the act of thinking itself. So it's really much more foundational than just diffusion of knowledge. And has this self-reinforcing element to it, that it becomes then self-reinforcing, potentially leading to the singularity component. The other challenges we have, it could be a concentration of power and profits. And the question is, where in the intermediation, in the chain, in the production chain is the value generation? Which part has the pricing power, the moat, to use Warren Buffett's language? Is it more in the data pools, who controls the data pools, who controls the knowledge about various industrial processes? Or is the valuation generation, the pricing power, more on the LLM foundation models? Or can the foundation models be commodified such that you compete the pricing power away? So how should the industrial organization look like, where you will shift the pricing power or keep it with the consumer? And then, of course, there's the issue that this might be a winner-takes-it-all technology. And, and many people argue we might be in an AI bubble. And the question is, if it's a winner-takes-it-all, it will be one company winning. How can it be that all AI companies have such high prices? And how long will the bubble go on? Do we want our investors riding the bubble, knowing that the price is too high, but they don't want to go against it because they ride the bubble because then the likelihood of bursting is not so high. There's differences to the internet bubble as well from the 2000s, early 2000s. What's different is like the physical investments in this data centers and computation power depreciates very fast. So the chips are outdated very quickly in 6 months, even though you invest hundreds of millions of dollars. And the investment it doesn't really matter where you invest, where you build your data center. It can be anywhere in the world. While for the internet cables, it was essentially at a specific locality, or the mobile phones, you have to cell towers, they had to be in certain localities, they can't be moved around, while these new technologies are very different. But overall, I think Philippe will talk about the big picture, saying, okay, where do we go? These three scenarios potentially. And also, I think, should we be afraid of artificial intelligence, or should we be afraid also of the transition phase of the going to the new steady state. So the transition itself, even if the final steady state is a good one, the transition itself can be very challenging as well and potentially non-resilient. So with this opening remarks, we'll move on to Philippe, and we start with his talk, Should We Fear Artificial Intelligence? Philippe, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Markus. And you raised a number of difficult questions, and I will barely do justice to them. I will just touch upon a few questions, and you raise many important issues that would require many more webinars to be dealt with, and well beyond the scope of what I can do myself. Okay, so let's move maybe to the first slide. This is the front page of a report that we produced last year for the President of France, for President Macron, on AI, our ambition for France. That's kind of a bit pompous title. Yeah, and also, as you know, AI first developed in the form of deductive rule of the if something, then something type. It was called the symbolic approach based on reasoning and instructions. Next. Although the symbolic approach has not been abandoned, the statistical approach to AI has been gaining ground since the 1990s with the advent of machine learning. Unlike the symbolic approach, the statistical approach involves no explicit human instruction. The machine is trained to recognize links from a set of training data, and then the machine applies those links to new data to perform a task. The success of the statistical approach rests on two main ingredients: data and computing power. The AI revolution affects all domains of activities, as you, Markus, very well explained: the economy, public services, the organization of work, media, culture. And within that revolution, the emergence of generative AI represents an unprecedented acceleration. But you know, already we have a French researcher called Yann LeCun. Yann was the head researcher in Meta and just left Meta. And he believes we can go beyond LLM now. And he's working on the next revolution within the revolution. So just to give you an example of the acceleration of events, it took 2.5 years for Netflix to reach 1 million users. It took 2.5 months for Instagram to reach 1 million users. It only took 5 days for ChatGPT to reach 1 million users. So there are a kind of pessimistic view and a cautiously optimistic. I like to contrast, you know, with my friend Acemoglu, but at the end of the day, I don't think we differ so much. But it's a way to just make it more, you know, juicy. So I would say that Daron doesn't think that there is big growth impact of the AI revolution, and he stresses the very negative employment impact. My own view that I will push in this presentation is that AI, technologically speaking, has substantial growth potential and even employment creation potential, but this requires appropriate policies and institutions to be put in place for that potential to be fulfilled. Next. So first, consider AI and growth. In joint work with Chad Jones and Ben Jones, we developed a model of AI and growth to illustrate the view that AI should boost productivity growth because it automates both tasks in the production of goods and services and tasks in the production of ideas. It makes the ideas easier to find. So for example, ideas, AI helps you find solutions to complex problems, facilitates imitation and learning, can become self-improving, but even beyond that, you know, we know that new ideas are often recombination of old ideas. When with AI, you can recombine much more. You can get many more recombinations, and you can also very quickly select among all those possible new ideas, those ideas that you want to experiment and test.
Do you make a distinction between the idea generation and the diffusion of ideas?
And then there is diffusion. Here I was just saying diffusion of an idea that you implement, okay? Mm-hmm. And then you can say, well, you know, I can diffuse also to, you know, imitation may also become easier. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we're just talking about the production of ideas. But of course, beyond that, Markus, there is the diffusion process. Okay, so for example, take a basic Joseph Zera model where you produce GDP with, various inputs, x1, xn, and those inputs themselves, you can produce them with labor if the corresponding task has not been automated, or with capital if the corresponding tasks have been automated. And let capital L denote the sum of Li's, and capital K denote the sum of Ki's. Then you see you end up with an aggregate production function of that type, where the growth of per capita GDP is just the growth of A divided by 1 over alpha. But you see, with you have two sources of growth of per capita GDP. One source, next slide. One source is that AI would increase the alpha, because you will have more and more tasks automated, but AI also increase, GA, which is the rate of growth of A. And so that's what I call automating production of goods and services and automating production of ideas. So those are two sources whereby AI can boost economic growth. So let me move on. So, there is a paper that I think you all know, but I want to just mention it again, by our friend Eric Brynjolfsson and co-authors, which came out now in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, called Generative AI at Work. And what they do next on that paper, in that paper, they consider a large firm, a firm that belongs to which is a top 500, a Fortune 500 US company. And this Fortune 500 US company advises small and medium-sized enterprises on the adoption of new software. So in fact, what happens that you are the head of a small and medium-sized enterprise, you want to adopt new software, you contact this company. They usually direct you to employees all over the world, in particular in the Philippines, and those Philippines employees try to answer your queries about how to install your new software. And for example, one way to measure agent productivity is to look at the number of resolutions per hour. And then what happened with that company is that they progressively gave access of this to ChatGPT to these Philippines employees. So of course, those who got access became more productive than those who were not yet granted access to ChatGPT. So you could compare, you could have a treatment group of those who got access, and you compare to a control group of similar employees with similar characteristics, prior productivity, etc., that haven't yet got access to ChatGPT. And then what they showed is that those, compared to the control group of those who didn't yet got access to ChatGPT, those who are granted access to ChatGPT would see productivity boosted by 14% after 1 month and up to 25% after 5 months. So that's of course, it's a micro study. Then you are interested in the macro effect of AI on TFP. And so one way is to say I could extrapolate from previous technological revolutions, electricity and IT. The other one is to do what Daron did in a paper that he published in Economic Policy Journal, which is to adopt a task-based approach. So let me just talk about these two approaches. So the first one is that we know that the electricity revolution of the 1920s in the US increased productivity growth by 1.3 percentage point per year during 10 years. So if you are growing at 1% per year before, you would grow at 2.3% for 10 years and then back to 1%. The IT revolution increased productivity growth between 1995 and 2005 per year by 0.8 percentage point, meaning that if before 95 you are growing at 1% per year, TFP would grow at 1.8% for 10 years in a row, then go back to 1%. So you would get something like this. You see, without AI, GDP would evolve according to the dotted line. And with AI, you see, during 10 years, you would have a steeper curve that, an additional 0.8 or 1.3 or whatever. And then you would grow again as of 2035 at the same rate. But of course, with a level of GDP which would be permanently higher than if you had not adopted AI, okay? So that's the extrapolation method. Okay. So now I want to go more into a task-based approach. So the task-based approach is that Acemoglu relied on the task-based model that he developed with Pascal Restrepo to estimate the effect of AI on TFP, and he concluded to a very small 0.07 per additional percentage point, which means 10 times less than the IT revolution. Okay. And so the way he did is to say, well, I put myself in the conditions where I can say, well, TFP gain is the product of 4 terms, the GDP share of tasks that are exposed to AI, times among those tasks, what is the share of tasks for which it is really profitable to implement AI. Then you look at the labor share adjusted for AI, and then you look at the labor cost saving enabled by AI. And he put figures on each of those terms, borrowing from the existing empirical literature, and he concludes to 0.07. But then with my co-author Simon Bunel, we went back to the empirical studies that Daron had looked at. So first, if you look at the GDP share of task, Daron said you borrowed from a paper by Elundu et al. That would say, well, 19.9. But, there are various estimates, and the IMF in particular, assessed that 60% of tasks in the US should be exposed to AI, and 68 up to 68% of tasks in the UK. So the interval to consider is anything between 18.5 and 68%. Now, if you look among those tasks that are exposed to AI, what is the share of tasks for which it is profitable to implement AI? Then Daron looks at a paper by Svanberg et al. That looks at visual tasks, and they say that at today's cost, 23% of visual tasks exposed to AI would be profitable to automate for American firms. But this assumes zero cost reduction over the next 10 years. But there will be a cost reduction because there is something called technical progress. And in fact, Svanberg et al. Themselves contemplate 3 scenarios of cost reduction, respectively of annual cost reduction of 10% or 20 or 50%, leading respectively to 30% of tasks, visual tasks, or 50% or 80% that would become profitable to automate in the next 10 years by 2042. You see, and so the interval to consider would be anything between 23% and 80%. Even then, here we look at the speed at which AI catches up with humans in terms of productivity. And you see that the visual task is in the middle, but you have tasks which is, for example, understanding, writing, or language, where the catching up is much faster. So even concentrating on visual tasks may be too pessimistic. So maybe I am even with the 80% within 20 years, I am being even more, I'm being, underestimating the share of exposed tasks for which it is profitable to implement AI.
So Philippe, can I ask you about this task-based approach? It assumes essentially that the task will stay the same, the grouping will stay the same, but it could also change radically. We can restructure and reorganize things radically.
Absolutely. Here you look as if it was Rodriguez. He assumed the Halton theorem and that you could use this approach. Absolutely. The task could change and everything could change. But it's an estimate. That's what you can do, because otherwise you have no way to. I just want to say you're absolutely right. The task can change, but then if everything changes, I'd have no clue. Alors, if the next thing.
But would you say it's an underestimate if you use rigid task buckets?
If you keep the same task, you could imagine that you tend to underestimate even further, probably. The labor cost saving enabled by AI, what Daron does is an average between a paper by Noy and Zhang that has 40% of labor cost saving and the 14% of Brynjolfsson. But remember that after 5 months, the Brynjolfsson have productivity. The firm, the Fortune 500 company, zoomed, analyzed by Brynjolfsson et al. They estimate that after 5 months, the productivity increase is not 14 but 25%. So at the very minimum, it should be 33, and you may go up to 40%. So again, there, Daron is, very much on the pessimistic side. And so at the end of the day, anything in the interval between 0.07 or 0.08 additional percentage point, and 1.24 percentage point per year over 10 years is that, could be generated by AI. And in fact, with my co-author, we believe that good median is an increase in annual growth rate of productivity by 0.68 percentage point. Remember that I mentioned 0.8 for the IT. I am with 0.68. I am in the same ballpark as IT, and 10 times more than what Daron estimates. So if we just look, at AI as automating tasks in the production of goods and services, I get much more than what Daron gets, and I get something much closer to what IT generated. Okay, and there I am abstracting from the fact that AI automates tasks in the production of ideas. So let me move on.
What about, do you include essentially robots? Robots will use AI as well, no? If humanoid.
AI may also use, that's right. Here I just look at AI just automating labor share, but you're right, robots could also be affected. So I'm further underestimating. Let me go up. So remember, so far I focused on AI automating tasks in the production of goods and services, but I abstracted from the fact that AI also makes it easier to produce new ideas. Just to give you a sense of that.
Can I come back?
So in fact, you see, instead of having the red curve, you see you would have the light blue curve. So you would have a faster growth in the next 10 years, but even faster growth all the time, because you would see the blue line is permanently steeper than the dotted line, because you've changed the innovation technology forever with AI. So let me move on. You see, for example, if we look, my colleague Antonin Bergeau looked at the share of patents that cite AI papers. We call them AI patents. And they look at the share of AI patents registered at the US Patent Office. And you see that there is a surge of AI patents since 2010. Okay? There is a fast growth in the share of AI patents among all patents registered US.
But it's also
why those are interesting is because, in fact, you can show that they tend to be, the AI patents tend to be of better quality on all dimensions. They used to be more cited, they used to be more general, and they used to be more original. So if we were going from patenting to growth, to productivity growth, there are good reasons to believe that those patents should generate more growth. So that's the part where we try to assess the additional growth that would come from the fact that AI, changes your innovation technology, changes the production of ideas. But there are hints, to the fact that you accelerate the production of patents, which are these AI patents, which are particularly high quality. So usually patents that are more cited, more general, more original, they tend to generate more growth, okay? And so I haven't yet assessed how much more growth you get, but you see the 0.68 per year over a 10-year period is clearly an underestimate, because, we get much more leverage from the fact that AI also automates tasks in the production of ideas. So we are still currently, trying to assess how much more growth you get from there. Okay, so that's on the technological side. So overall, technologically speaking, yes.
There's also an effect that people label everything AI nowadays. So the quality might not be the same as an AI patent 10 years ago.
Yeah,
so
that might. That's right.
Every firm put the .com on its name to get the better. But it doesn't mean that there became more .com, or similarly here it could be that they just relabel things AI to get more attention or more valuation.
Yeah, and that the high quality patents tend to be patents that you label AI, but that could be. But usually, AI patents, they still make some use of AI. I mean, it's not just pure window dressing. But you're right. I mean, we should look at the extent to which it's pure window dressing, or but if it was just pure window dressing, why would there be a better quality? I mean, you see that there is something there.
No, historically they didn't do it, but right now, if you go to a venture capitalist and call it AI, it's much easier to raise funds than calling it, information technology.
That's right. But then it would generate better patents?
It will not going forward. In the past it did, but going forward not. Yes.
Yeah, but that's the recent data, so it's very recent. So maybe it's now and not later on. That could be that it's a current phenomenon and not lasting, but voilà, that's still, the jury is out. But now on the downside is the lack of competition. So if that's based on my joint work with Bergeau, Bopart, Clino, and Lee, we have this Review of Economic Studies paper 2024, and if we move on, we see that growth, if you look at the average yearly TFP growth rate in the US, it went up a lot between 95 2005 and then went down since 2005. That's something that I might have mentioned to you in a previous webinar during the COVID period, I think. I was working on that. But since then, the paper came out. Yeah, at the time it was not out yet. Okay. That very much has to do with IT. That's the IT revolution. But the problem is that during the IT revolution, so you had this growth upsurge between 95 and 2005, followed by a big growth decline. If I go next slide, the growth upsurge went along with an accelerated increase in concentration. Here I show services, but it's true in all sectors. And that's the paper by Otter, Van Reenen, Katz, Dorn, et al. In the QJE, where they showed that you have this emergence of superstar firms. Those are the IT firms. Those are the firms that knew how to harness IT better than other firms. Google, Microsoft, Walmart. They through merger and acquisition, they managed to expand very fast, and that explains in large part the rise in concentration. And you can see the share of sales of the four largest firms, or the share of employment of the four largest firms, increasing at an accelerated pace in the 1990s, exactly at the time where you had this growth boost. It's because the boost was driven by those superstar firms.
Concentration is a technological phenomenon because of network externalities or other increasing returns to scale by technology? Or
it could be purely technological. It could be also that they also knew how to, they managed to do a lot of merger and acquisition. And they also increased establishments more. I will show. What you see is that if you look at the average markup, which is the red line, it went up during that period. But not because within firms markup went up. The within firm markup is the blue curve. It's because you had a composition effect. The high markup firms, which were the superstar firms, became more pervasive, and that's the black curve. So really what happened is that with the advent of IT, you had this rise in concentration and in the share of production by these large firms. We know next. The problem is that they ended up discouraging entry of new firms. And when you look at the firms, new entry, you see entry of all firms, entry rate going down. So the problem is that with IT, IT was very much, carried by firms that expanded very fast, but they ended up discouraging new entry. That's very Schumpeterian, you see. It's very much the Schumpeterian conundrum. Now, why do I mention that with AI? If I go next, is because AI, if you look at AI, the upstream segments in the AI value chain, in particular the cloud, is dominated by three superstar firms, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And you have one big actor, GPU, in the market for graphic processors. So the problem is that, you see, technologically speaking, AI has a big growth potential, but the problem, exactly in the same way as with IT, you had this competition policy did not adapt and did not prevent, the emergence of the growth, the excessive growth of these firms, which subsequently inhibited entry of new innovating firms. You may have the same phenomenon with AI.
So would you actually split the big companies apart like we did with AT&T?
Alors then, there are various things you could do to boost competition on AI. What I would advocate is first open source, very important. Then I would say too many regulations is not a good thing because the large firms, the large incumbents, they know how to cope with regulations. The new entrants, they don't. The other thing is that we have in Europe the Digital Market Act that asks incumbent firms to share data. It should be extended to the cloud and the whole value chain of AI. And then, you should adapt competition policy. When you decide whether or not to allow a new merger and acquisition, usually competition authorities, they focus on market share and market definition, and not so much on the extent to which the merger will inhibit subsequent innovation. So they should have a much more dynamic approach to competition policy. So in the same way that we did not adapt competition policy to the IT revolution, it becomes even more urgent to reform our competition policy to fully take advantage of the growth potential of AI. Okay. So I am optimistic on the technology side, but I am not very optimistic on the institutional side. I don't know if we shall be able to adapt our competition policy to make sure that it's not all monopolized by a few firms that will discourage everybody. And that's where the downside, that's where I'm not so optimistic, you see. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we did on AI, we looked a lot. That's of course not yet generative AI because we didn't have enough data. We did a survey of 9,000 representative French firms with each of them more than 50 employees. And we compared the evolution of employment between firms that adopt some AI and similar firms that do not adopt AI at all before 2020. So we have a treatment group and a control group. And what we found is similarly as what we found when we looked at robotization on French firms. We get that firms that adopt AI, they increase employment. Alors you might say, well, how come? Well, it's exactly for the same reason as firms that robotized, they increase employment on average. It's due to a productivity effect. You can see that firms that adopt AI, they increase sales because when you adopt AI, you become more productive, more competitive. Therefore, the world market demand for your good increases, and therefore you employ more. It seems that this productivity effect more than counteracted so far the substitution effect. It may change next year, over the next years, you see. So that's so far. This may completely change, but at least there is this effect, and we could make the best of that effect. It's not uniform. For example, AI adoption for administrative purposes on highly exposed jobs to AI and jobs for which most of the tasks can be automated by AI, like executive secretary, administrative service, there we see a slightly negative effect of AI on employment. So let's move on. There is an interesting paper published by the International Labour Office where the authors look at the generative AI and jobs, and they decompose jobs into tasks. And we move that. They put a low score to tasks with small replacement risk, a medium score to tasks with medium replacement risk by AI, and a high score to tasks which have a high replacement risk. We see the upper panel are managerial jobs. Each row, which is too small for you to see, corresponds to restaurant manager, hospital manager, construction manager. You see that most of the tasks are in the dark blue zone, which is low replacement risk. A few of them have some tasks with high replacement risk, which is in fact the boring task probably, and they can concentrate on the creative task. So for managers, it's all good news. If now I move to the lower panel, clerks, you see, clerical workers, you see that most of the tasks are in the high replacement risk. So if you look at just that, the yellow, the red to yellow. So if I now move on, I can map out, that's on France, all jobs in this two-dimensional diagram. When you move from bottom to top, you go from low exposure, from jobs that are not very exposed to AI, to jobs that are highly exposed to AI. And when I move from left to right, I move from jobs where a high share of tasks can be substituted for by AI to jobs where most tasks, AI complements humans. So, of course, the worst part is the northwest, is the left, is the upper left. That's the part where you worry most, which is telemarketer, accountant, secretaries. So if I look, based on that diagram, I could move on, and I could have the next slide. And the next slide, you could say, well, let me start from the upper right. You start with accountant, telemarketer, secretary. And that represents 10 altogether. And I look at the share of total employment in France. It represents like 10% of employment. So you could say, well, based on that, you would think that 10% of employment are directly threatened by AI. The rest is not entirely threatened, okay? But in fact, this is too pessimistic, and I will show you why. So if you move from the extreme, the upper right of the diagram, down to secretaries, you are approximately at 10% of the total employment. But let's move on. What
Can I
we've
ask you,
done now is to go back.
are there some female hit differently from male employees?
Sorry, which ones?
Are female employees hit more than male
Alors,
employees?
that I haven't looked. That I haven't looked. That's a good question, Marcus.
And
I don't have
also
the
in
answer at
terms of,
hand. I think we looked. I think very much male and female are very similar. I think, but I want to confirm to you because I want to double check.
and so Eli asked, what are the implications for our education system? Should we educate
Absolutely.
people differently? Perhaps you can.
Yeah. So but I will get to the education.
Okay.
Alors, I move to. Alors now what we've done here is to go back to the mapping that I had. Moving from bottom to top, it's low exposure to high exposure, and from left to right, it's high substitutability to low substitutability. So if you look first at the lower half of the diagram, those are the jobs that are not highly exposed, that have low exposure to AI, and not surprisingly, and therefore there I regress employment on AI adoption. And you see, not surprisingly there, AI adoption has no effect on employment. Okay, so that's not surprising. Okay, so let's move to the next. Then I look at those jobs which are highly exposed, but most of the tasks are complemented. AI complements humans, and you see a positive effect of AI implementation. So now let's move to the northwest, which is those jobs that was most fearful. Those were the ones I expected would be really a disastrously negative effect of AI on employment. And you see, to our surprise, even when we restrict to those jobs, we find a positive effect of AI on employment. But when we try to zoom into that, and it all depends on the use of AI you consider. If you look at AI use for production processes, or AI use for IT security, which are if you look at the diagram, I cannot show the arrow, but you can see the top, when you take the right-hand side, exactly those two, the top graphs, you see a positive effect of AI. They are still on those, if you consider AI used for production or IT security, it's okay, even for those jobs on the northwest of the left-hand side graph. But it's only when you have a slightly negative effect when AI is used for administration processes. So to have a negative effect of AI on employment, you need highly exposed jobs that have where a high share of tasks can be substituted by AI, and AI used for administration process. So that's much less than 10% of the jobs. Okay.
But
so let's go.
For the first 2 years, it's different than later on.
Alors, we will see if later on things change, Marcus. I don't know yet, okay? That I can only judge what happened so far. Let's keep going. We looked at Danish data as well. So in Denmark, we looked, at, but there we have an instrument for AI, and the instrument is that there is more AI adoption when managers have their spouse working in AI-linked sectors, okay? So let me move on. I don't want to spend too much time. So first, if we take the OLS, again, in Denmark, you see that on average, firms that adopt AI, they increase employment compared to similar firms that don't. Okay, so let's move on now. I look at the IV strategy, and the idea is that each firm is connected to other firms through personal, spousal links. So you have firms for which the manager or the managers have spouse that are, firms that have already adopted AI, okay, or not.
How do you get this data that you even know the spouse of
Yeah, we know where the wife works. It's amazing. Or when I say the wife or the husband, the spouse.
Yes.
It can be either. Okay. Yeah. So let's keep going. So for example, here, firm A, half of the employees are linked to someone who works in a firm which is AI adopted, and half of them work in a firm that does not adopted AI. Okay, that's firm A. Then move to the next. Firm B, there you would have 2/3 of the employees would have spouse that are linked, that are working in AI firms, and only 1/3 not working. Okay, so what we do is that we the first stage, adoption is a function of the spouse-driven network exposure, okay? And so that's the first stage, and then you have the second stage. So let's move on. And we see that the first stage works very well. I mean, when you have AI adoption, you have more AI adoption when you are more linked to spouse who are in AI-linked sectors. Then we go to the two-stage least square, and we see that it works well again. But here AI is instrumented by these spouse links. Voilà. So just to tell you that what we found for France, we get a better, we get something with an IV for Denmark, okay? So let me move on. In fact, the conclusion is that so far, we don't find an existential risk of AI. So far, no sense of mass unemployment. Yet, you see the productivity effect. What I would like to stress, there are two more slides that I didn't show. We show that for France, firms that are exposed to AI, they are subject to more turnover and also more job creation. So there is more turnover, but also more job creation. So in fact, what happens is that, in fact, AI will destroy jobs. But AI will also create jobs for at least two reasons. One is that the productivity effect that I was mentioning, firms that adopt AI become more productive and therefore, higher demand for their product and they hire more. And the other reason is that I mentioned that AI will make ideas easier to find. So you will have more new ideas, and new ideas are new activities. And so that will also be a source of job creation. The problem is to manage the transition from the old jobs to new jobs. And there, my model is Denmark. I believe first in countries that have a good education system, and that's exactly, Markus, what you are referring for. What is a good education system? It's an education system where you learn to learn. I am very conservative. I believe in books. I believe that children should learn to read, to write correctly, to grammar, to not make orthograph mistakes, and to concentrate on their reading and concentrate on calculus, without relying at all on ChatGPT. You see what I mean? They should learn to prove a theorem. They should learn to... No, but that's important because you learn to learn. There's been a study on Switzerland recently showing that those children that were not exposed to ChatGPT initially and and that were really learning on books, whenever you have a change in going from one ChatGPT to another system, they would adapt much more easily because then they would learn to learn. They would be adaptable. So I believe in a school system where you are dealing with books. You read, you prove theorems, you calculate yourself without relying at all on ChatGPT. Then you can verify, but you don't rely. On top of the education system, the way I think about it, you should have adequate labor market policy. And what I like in Denmark, we can move on, is they have flexicurity. In Denmark, when you lose your job for 2 years up to a certain level of salary, you get 90% of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. My friend Alexandra Roulet, but that I already mentioned to you when I presented during COVID, she compared the health of a worker in a firm that closes down in Denmark to the health of a worker similar in age, education, and experience in a firm that does not close down. And she found no effect, a difference in difference, okay, before and after the firm closes down, and between the worker in the firm that closes down and the worker in the firm that does not close down. And you see no effect of using your job compared to the control group in Denmark on the purchase of antidepressants or drugs, unlike in the US, okay. No effect on the probability to visit a hospital for a disease or circulatory problem. And so they found a way to, to manage creative destruction. And obviously with AI, you will have more growth, but you will also have more creative destruction. That's why you need education and a good flexicurity system. So let me move on.
Are you critical of the German Kurzarbeit or the short-term?
And I think Germany is interesting as well. Germany has a lot of good things. I know less of the German system, Markus.
But
so there I would defer to you.
They keep you at work, short-term work, essentially.
Yeah, and there is more flexibility within the firm. Yeah, that's also a good idea. So my general conclusion is that, AI has growth potential, but to harness fully the growth potential, you need to adapt competition policy, to reform competition policy. AI has growth, job creation potential, and to make sure that we will not suffer too much from the job destruction, job creation, and go smoothly through this process. I advocate good education system, and on top of it, a good flexicurity system. And that ends my presentation.
Can I ask you about education? Do you favor general education and less specialization? Would you reduce the specialization on the work training and all that in order to keep it more general?
Alors, that's a big debate, Markus. In France, we went too far on the general education. I think in Switzerland and Germany, they push for, specialization earlier.
Yes.
And therefore more people can find work. But I think it's important to keep maybe technical, specialization, but putting a little more general education in them. You see what I mean? I would not go all the way to the French system where everyone goes into psychology, because that creates lots of unemployed. I would keep the Swiss or German system, but with a very good basic education system when you learn to learn, as I mentioned before, and keeping a larger share of general education so that people become more adaptable. But I would keep the good sides of the German-Swiss systems, but with a little more maybe of general education, as part of in the curriculum, so that people can more easily move from job to job.
The other thing is, if I think about when should we use ChatGPT, it's a little bit like the calculator. Now you say for the first 8 years in school you cannot use it, and the 9th grade you can start.
Exactly.
Do you see something similar there too, or you would do ChatGPT, you would rule it out altogether?
No. Well, I would try to ration. I would say when you are at school, I am in favor of homework done at school. I am in favor of the use of ChatGPT at school being strictly controlled by the professor, by the instructor. You see, so for example, I have an example in there is an economics in high school professor, a high school instructor in economics, and he uses ChatGPT to help left behind students catch up, but he controls the thing completely himself. You see what I mean? So I would advocate that they are not granted access to ChatGPT at school, and the homework is done at school. When they are at home, you can't control. You see what I mean? You can give advice to the parents, but you cannot be there with cameras looking what's going on at home. But what you can do is make sure that the homework is done at school, and therefore at school you have a strict control of the use of ChatGPT.
But let me push you a little bit. One argument for using ChatGPT is to make it more fine-tuned, because, when you go to school, the weak student is together with the strong student, and it's not tailored to it. And there's this, teaching a la Socrates, where you just say, okay, this is a weaker student, I figure out where the weakness is, and I zoom in on this, and ChatGPT can do that. While education cannot do this.
No, that's right. So you can use, but that would be up to the teacher. So you could say that the teacher could use ChatGPT to help left behind students, and they could do that early. You could say, I will use, but I control the use of ChatGPT, not you control. I control it.
Let me throw another idea at you. I predict that in 10 years we will not read books, we will chat with books.
But I hope very much I will fight that like crazy. I am very conservative in that respect. I will fight that like crazy. I will say no. At school, you use books with paper that you can touch, and I will strongly oppose that.
But you know that I think it was Socrates who refused to write things down because I think we should memorize everything. He was against writing things down. You don't think you will, be in 100 years, people will think this was very old-fashioned to read books?
Look, I hope not. I hope people will still enjoy reading books and memorizing with books, you see, and not because with ChatGPT the problem is that people don't train their memory as much. That's been proved. It's a Swiss study. I'll try to get the reference and send it to you, Markus.
Okay. So do you think, it goes beyond economics? There has huge implications, AI, societal implications as well. Where do you see the biggest challenges?
There are many. For example, in Germany you have co-management between employees and my hope is that AI could be used to develop soft skills in enterprises and develop the co-management and social dialogue. It's not automatic, but one could encourage firms to with thanks to AI, employees will be better informed and therefore could participate to decisions or the making, or to a larger extent, at least be involved to a larger extent. So my hope, but that's not automatic. You see, you provide incentives for firms to keep their workers and employees, and to help them, to help them participate to a larger extent to the life of them. That's one dimension where you could have a virtuous use of AI, but that's not automatic. In the same way that you direct firms toward green innovation, you need to direct them towards using AI in that way, and not because there are firms that want to use AI to get rid of workers, to use them as objects or to whatever, and dematerialize that. And I think that, I know Danny Roderick has been thinking a lot about what could you do to make sure that firms use AI to enhance soft skills, for example. And that, I think, that way of thinking is, I think, very interesting to pursue. I don't have much to add to what Danny and Stephanie are saying on that.
But do you see through AI there will be more change of jobs within a firm, or do you think it will be the whole firms will go under, will be replaced with new startups?
I think it could be more. It could be both.
Across firms.
It could be both. And when you talk about Germany, I think there is a lot going on within firms. And I think, and I hope that it will help, more polyvalence. Workers could become more polyvalent. That's why I talked about the soft skills as well. You see, that helps, workers become more polyvalent. But it's not, again, it will not, it's not sure that it's not automatic. We need to find ways to, incentives, devices to push firms to go in that direction. And that's where,
And do you see a role for the government to push the firms this way?
I think government have a role to play in civil society as well. Media.
What suggestions? Do you have any particular suggestions, or?
Sorry?
Do you have any suggestions what the government should do, or the civil society should?
That's
which measures, or should
praise firms that manage to train their workers, keep them longer, provide them with more. We know when there is more promotion, when firms are better at promoting, maybe they should be rewarded in one way or another. You say, there are rewards in the same way that you do industrial policy. You find ways to reward, to encourage firms, and firms that get rid of their workers too often. There should be a malus, the bonus-malus system. When you abuse and you get rid of workers too frequently, then I think you should be penalized. I mean, you should contribute more to the unemployment insurance system, or you should be. So I think in the same way you can direct firms to innovate greener, you can also direct firms to behave in a more, virtuous way.
So some years ago, perhaps you included some famous economists and scientists have written a proposal that we should slow down the development of AI.
It's very hard. It's very hard to control that. I think
But what if
you can slow down how you
it down
introduce
or not?
AI at school? You see what I mean? That I can control. But the introduction of AI, period. That I think, because AI will introduce, you see, for example, Europe would say I over-regulate AI, but then AI will go to countries where it's not regulated at all, and at the end of the day, you lose to those countries, and the winners are those who don't regulate at all. So I rather regulate a little bit, remain attractive, so that overall AI will be more regulated. Otherwise, it will just develop in countries that are. Like you have pollution heavens, you see. I mean, you would have the parallel.
So if you look at Europe in particular, do you see any way? So there's you can have the value creation and the profit maximization going on at the foundation models, or more in the application and the data pools. What's the optimal policy for Europe to strategically position itself when they're?
I think Europe should try.
China and the US are battling about.
But, we cannot catch up on everything. First, I mean, we have, for example, in France, we have good health data, and I think in Germany also, and so government should help build local computing power to help firms that can exploit the good data. We won't be good in everything. But for example, health and education, I could imagine, or energy, I could imagine that, AI could be good. For example, on energy, I'm currently looking at a big water company in France called Veolia, which is the main water supplier. And they use AI to regulate air systems. They use air systems to purify water. They get dirty water and they purify the water with air. The problem is that, you may not want to use air system to the same intensity when you don't get as much inflow of dirty water, of used water, and when the water is not so dirty. So AI detects, the flow of dirty water and the extent to which it's dirty. So they manage to save a lot of energy. AI uses energy on the one hand, but they save much more energy than they use energy. In those things which involve energy or involve health or education, I think in those areas, we are pretty good and we can. But the other thing is that I told you about Yann LeCun, he wants to go beyond LLM. Voilà, and now he says he's establishing a new firm in France. Well, I'm very happy. As long as he doesn't have the Zuckman tax, he will do it. If you have the Zuckman tax, he will escape France. Okay, so you have to create an environment which is friendly to those who want to develop AI. We have good mathematicians in Europe, good engineers, good computer science people. They want to be. Also, Europe has the advantage that freedom and democracy. We still, we still incarnate, freedom, democracy, social model. I think is superior to the US social model. Concern for environment, with bigger in Europe. So I think we have a lot to attract people to Europe so far, and we should build on all our soft power to attract, those researchers that will help us make the next step in the AI revolution. And of course, then you get into Draghi. We don't have a true single market in Europe. That's not good. That's not good for innovation. We don't have a good financial ecosystem of innovation, not enough venture capital and institutional investors, and we don't have, DARPA. We don't have the equivalent of the DARPA that you have in the US. We need those things in Europe as well. And the problem is that only 10% of the Draghi recommendations have been implemented so far. But I believe very much in coalition of the willing. For example, France and Germany together, maybe with other countries that would join them, could implement the Draghi report between themselves. They could decide that they have a joint market, free market for high tech. They could decide that they do a joint DARPA. They could decide that they have a joint institutional investors. And that's the way to move on. I think that, and I think that's the way, that's my hope for Europe.
But if I compare two models, one is like the Draghi report is very much creating national champions or European champions, while the Chinese approach is very much competition driven. No?
But that's why I want DARPA. I would like DARPA in Europe.
Okay.
I want a DARPA way to do it as well.
Okay. So promoting competition and innovation.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's the way I would push.
Okay, thanks a lot, Philippe. It was fantastic
Thank you, Markus. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No, great.
Pleasure.
And I hope to see you soon again, either in Princeton or in Paris.